The Price of the Throne, a chronicle of silent revenge, the gavel's sharp strike echoed in the cavernous silence of the ornate courtroom. All eyes were on Thomas Beaumont, a man whose expensive suit could not hide the ugliness that twisted his handsome features. He pointed a trembling finger not at opposing counsel, but at his own pregnant wife. "Felicity, she was a mistake," he spat, the words venomous as they ricocheted off the polished marble. "A disastrous, regrettable mistake. And that thing she carries, is an error I refuse to pay for." A ripple of gasps spread through the room, but the real drama was not in his calculated cruelty. It was in the worn leather folder the judge had just placed on his bench, a folder that contained the last will of the one man Thomas could never intimidate, his late father. Subscribe to the channel if you dare to discover what hides behind the perfect life. Like this video to support more stories, and comment at the end what you would do in Adrian's situation. Contempt in the courtroom. The air in courtroom 4B of the Madrid County Superior Court was thick with the scent of old money and fresh animosity. It was a sterile, impersonal space, all mahogany paneling and muted gray carpet. Yet, it had become the arena for a deeply personal evisceration of a marriage. Felicity Vance, who hoped to soon be Felicity Vance again, sat with her back ramrod straight in her padded chair, her hands resting protectively over the noticeable bulge of her stomach, were the only part of her that betrayed the tremor running through her body. At 32, she still possessed the quiet, dreamy beauty that had first caught Thomas Beaumont's eye. Pensive gray eyes, a cascade of brown hair that she had simply pulled back, and a complexion that had never needed the heavy manipulations of the Beaumont family estheticians. Today, however, that beauty was shadowed by a weariness that went bone deep. She felt less like a person and more like a piece of legal evidence, the pregnant wife. Across the aisle, Thomas Beaumont was flanked by his lawyer, a shark in a tailored suit named Santiago, and his mother, Isabella Beaumont. Thomas was the picture of wounded pride. His jaw was clenched, and his brow furrowed in a performance of aggrieved masculinity. Felicity had once thought him devastatingly handsome. Now she saw the weakness in his chin, the petulance at the corner of his lips. He was a boy playing king, and his mother, Isabella, was the silent, unyielding power behind the throne. Isabella Beaumont was a masterpiece of preserved aristocracy. Her silver hair was pulled into a coif of glacial perfection. Her pearls were real, her suit was couture, and her disdain was palpable. She had not looked at Felicity once, preferring to stare at the judge as if he were a tardy waiter. From the moment Thomas had brought Felicity into the sprawling Beaumont estate in the mountains of Madrid, Isabella had treated her not as a future daughter-in-law, but as a hostile takeover attempt. Felicity was not of old money. Her father was a history professor, her mother a librarian. To the Beaumonts, whose wealth stretched back to railroad tycoons, Felicity was a curious commoner, a temporary amusement for their heir. "Mr. Beaumont," said Judge Alberto, his voice a low rumble that demanded attention. He was a man in his 60s, with a tired face that had seen every kind of human depravity. "We are here to discuss the division of assets in your divorce proceedings. Let's try to maintain a certain level of decorum." Thomas's lawyer, Mr. Santiago, rose smoothly. "Your Honor, my client's emotional state is simply a reflection of the deep betrayal he has suffered. He entered this marriage in good faith, only to discover—" Felicity's lawyer, a kind but firm woman named Maria Fuentes, cut him off. "Objection, Your Honor. Counsel is testifying." "The betrayal Mr. Santiago refers to," Maria continued, "is my client's discovery that the prenuptial agreement Mr. Beaumont forced upon her was not only unconscionable, but deliberately misleading." The prenuptial agreement. The infamous document Isabella had presented to Felicity over tea in the sunroom. "Just a formality, my dear," Isabella had said, sliding the thick document across the glass table. "A way to keep things orderly. We wouldn't want any misunderstandings down the road." Thomas had backed his mother, of course. "It's just the way things are done, Elle," he had said, avoiding her eyes. "It doesn't mean anything." It had meant everything. It stipulated that in the event of a divorce, Felicity would leave with nothing. Not a penny of the Beaumont fortune, no claim to their properties, not even alimony. At the time, blinded by love and a naive belief in their future, she had signed it. Now, with a child on the way, a Beaumont heir, the document was a cudgel they were using to bludgeon her into submission. They had offered a one-time payment of 50,000 euros and a confidentiality agreement so restrictive it would essentially erase her from their history. "The validity of the prenuptial agreement is what we are here to debate," Judge Alberto declared, his gaze fixed on Thomas. "But your personal feelings about your wife are, for the moment, irrelevant." This seemed to be the worst thing he could have said. Thomas, who had been simmering, suddenly erupted. He stood up, making his chair scrape back. "Irrelevant!" he scoffed, his voice rising. "She is the most relevant mistake I have ever made. I was entrapped. My father was ill. He had a fondness for her for some reason. And I went along with it." He gestured wildly toward Felicity. "She is a gold digger, Your Honor. A clever little parasite who saw a meal ticket and latched on." Maria Fuentes stood. "Your Honor, this is outrageous!" But the judge simply held up a hand, silencing her. He was watching Thomas, his expression unreadable. And Thomas, emboldened by the attention, took a step forward. He met Felicity's eyes, and the mask of the charming, carefree man she had married fell away completely, revealing the snarling, arrogant creature beneath. "Do you know what she did?" He addressed the judge, but his words were daggers aimed at her heart. "She got pregnant on purpose, after I told her we should wait, after I told her things weren't working. She did it to trap me, to try and secure a piece of my family's legacy." Felicity felt the blood drain from her face. It was a lie. A cruel and calculated lie. They had been trying to have a baby. It was Thomas who had been excited, who had talked about names, who had hugged her and whispered dreams of their future family. That was before his father, Arthur Beaumont, had passed away 2 months ago. Before Isabella had re-sunk her claws into her son's soul. Then came the words that would be seared into her memories forever. Thomas's voice dropped, becoming hoarse and guttural, dripping with a contempt so profound it physically hurt her. "She was a mistake," he repeated, pointing at her belly. "And that thing she carries, is an error I refuse to pay for." A collective gasp sucked the air from the room. Felicity felt it like a physical blow. The baby inside her, their child, kicked as if in protest. Tears sprang hot and fast, blurring the cruel face of the man she had loved. She saw Isabella smile a flash of triumphant malice. This was what they wanted. To break her. To humiliate her so completely she would crawl and accept their terms. "That is enough, Mr. Beaumont." Judge Alberto's voice was no longer tired. It was thunder. He slammed his gavel down, the sound reverberating in Felicity's shattered world. "That is more than enough. Now sit down." Thomas, looking slightly stunned by his own outburst, slumped into his chair, though his look of hatred remained fixed on Felicity. Judge Alberto surveyed the scene. His eyes lingered on Felicity's tear-stained face, then on Isabella's, full of self-satisfaction. He took a deep, calming breath and squared a pile of papers on his bench. "The court is going into recess for 15 minutes," he announced. "However, before we break, I have been notified this morning of a matter by the executor of the estate of the late Arthur Beaumont." At the mention of his father, Thomas sat up straighter. A flicker of something, confusion, perhaps apprehension, crossed his face. The judge picked up the worn leather folder. "It appears," he said, "that Mr. Arthur Beaumont's final will and testament, executed 1 month prior to his death, contained certain stipulations that have a direct and material bearing on the assets currently being discussed in this divorce. With the executor's permission, and given its relevance, I am unsealing it now." He opened the folder. The silence in the courtroom returned, but this time it was different. It was thick with confusion and an electric tension. A new will. Arthur's will had already been read weeks ago. It was simple. It left everything to his only son, Thomas, with a generous trust for Isabella. What was this? Felicity wiped away her tears, her heart beating with a strange, new rhythm. Arthur, the kind and gentle Arthur, had been the only Beaumont who had ever truly seen her, the only one who had been on her side. In his last few months, as his illness worsened, he would often ask her to sit with him in the garden, away from the oppressive gloom of the mansion and the even more oppressive presence of his wife. They would talk for hours about history, about books, about her dreams for the future. He seemed to understand her in a way Thomas never did. "What does this mean, Your Honor?" asked Mr. Santiago. His composure rattled for the first time. "A new will? We were not informed." "It appears, Mr. Santiago," the judge said, looking over his spectacles at the document, "that no one was. Arthur Beaumont was a very private man." He cleared his throat, the sound unnaturally loud in the silent room, and began to read. "If you were Felicity, what would you be thinking at this moment? Could a new will be the salvation you need? Comment below with your thoughts." The patriarch's hidden secret. As Judge Alberto's voice began to recite the legal jargon of the will's preamble, Felicity's mind drifted back, away from the sterile cruelty of the courtroom, to the sun-drenched gardens of the Beaumont estate. She remembered the first time she met Arthur Beaumont. It was 1.5 years ago. Thomas had brought her to the family's annual summer gala, a lavish affair with champagne fountains and string quartets. She had been terrified, a simple librarian's daughter, adrift in a sea of couture and condescension. Isabella had introduced her with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Her tone made the name Felicity Vance sound like a small, anonymous business. Felicity had escaped to the rose garden, overwhelmed, when she found a man in a tweed jacket with his back to her, carefully pruning a climbing rose. He turned, and his eyes, a surprisingly clear blue, held a warmth that was completely absent from the main party. It was Arthur Beaumont. "Ah, you found my hiding place," he had said with a kind smile. "Don't worry, I won't tell if you won't." They had talked for almost an hour. He didn't ask her about her family's money or connections. He asked her what she was reading. He asked her about her work at the Madrid Public Library. His face had lit up when she described her passion for historical archives. He spoke of his own love of history, a passion he lamented that his son did not share. "Thomas sees history as a list of assets acquired," Arthur had said, with a sad, knowing sigh. "He sees the names Rockefeller, Carnegie, Beaumont, but he doesn't understand the stories, the humanity." In that one conversation, Arthur had shown her more genuine interest and kindness than Isabella had in 6 months of strained dinners. He saw her not as his son's accessory, but as a person. Over the next year, he became her quiet ally in the golden cage of the Beaumont family. As Isabella set subtle traps, and Thomas grew more distant under his mother's influence, Arthur would seek Felicity out. He would leave a rare first-edition book on her nightstand, or invite her to walk the grounds, sharing stories of the family that were not about wealth, but about love, loss, and madness. He was already ill then, a lung disease that stole his breath, but never his sharp intellect. As his condition worsened, the dynamic in the house changed. Isabella became more controlling, treating her husband's illness as an inconvenience and tightening her grip on Thomas. The pregnancy had been a brief, shining moment of hope. Thomas had been euphoric at first. It was his idea, a way to, as he had put it, finally start our own family, away from all the pressure. They had celebrated with a trip to the Costa del Sol, away from the oppressive atmosphere of the estate. He had placed his hands on her flat belly and spoken of a future that felt real and filled with love. The moment they returned, Isabella shattered it. Felicity overheard the argument from the top of the grand staircase. "A baby?" Isabella's voice was like ice. "Thomas, you're an idiot. You have no idea what you've done." "Mother, it's my child, our child. I love Eli." "Love?" she had scoffed. "You're infatuated with a librarian, Thomas. A nobody. And now she's tied herself to our legacy with the oldest trick in the book. Do you think for a second she wasn't planning this? To tie you down, to make herself indispensable?" The poison took root quickly. Thomas began to pull away. He started spending more time at the office, coming home late, smelling of expensive whiskey and another woman's perfume. The excuses were flimsy, the apologies hollow. He became irritable, echoing his mother's criticisms. He would comment on Felicity's clothes, her friends, her lack of ambition. Then, Arthur's health took a sharp turn for the worse. In his final weeks, he was confined to his bed. The house was somber and quiet. Isabella managed his care with a ruthless efficiency, keeping visitors to a minimum. But Arthur kept asking to see Felicity. One afternoon, just a month before he passed, he called for her. His breathing was labored, but his eyes were lucid. "Felicity," he had said, taking her hand. His was frail, all thin skin and bone. "Don't let them break you. You have more strength than any of them." He looked at her stomach with a meaningful gesture. "And you have a responsibility to that child, a responsibility to be strong." He had made her promise him. She hadn't understood the full weight of his words then. 2 weeks later, he called his personal lawyer, a man Felicity had never met, to the house. Isabella had been furious, trying to insist that the family's lawyer, Mr. Santiago, be present. Arthur, with a surprising burst of strength, had refused. "This is a private matter, Isabella," he had told her. The meeting lasted 3 hours. The next day, Arthur had seemed more at peace. He passed away in his sleep a month later. The first reading of the will had been exactly what everyone expected. A simple document that left Beaumont Enterprises and the bulk of the estate to Thomas. Isabella was granted the right of lifelong residence in the family mansion and a generous stipend from a separate trust. It was so straightforward that Thomas had grinned, a look of vindicated relief on his face. With his father gone, the last obstacle to his absolute inheritance and Isabella's absolute influence was removed. 2 days later, Thomas had filed for divorce. The words were cold, rehearsed. He said the marriage was a mistake, that he had been pressured by his father's health. He framed it as a clean break, a return to the natural order of things. When Felicity, heartbroken and 7 months pregnant, had refused to be discarded so easily, he had turned vicious. The battle over the prenuptial agreement began, and now here they were. Mr. Santiago's sharp intake of breath snapped Felicity out of the present. Judge Alberto had finished with the preliminary sections of the will. His eyes scanned the room before he continued. "We now come to Article 4, the judge said, his voice dropping slightly, commanding the full attention of the room. "Regarding the disposition of my primary asset, my majority interest in Empresas Beaumont, S.A." Thomas leaned forward, a look of self-satisfaction returning to his face. This was it, the confirmation of his kingdom. "I, Arthur Beaumont," the judge read, his voice clear and deliberate, "being of sound mind and body, do hereby declare the following. My son, Thomas Beaumont, has, in recent months, shown a lamentable lack of judgment and a character unfit for the stewardship of the company my grandfather built." A gasp swept through the room. Thomas's face went from self-satisfaction to shock. Isabella's carefully constructed composure cracked. Her mouth fell slightly ajar. "What?" Thomas whispered, the words stolen from the room. The judge continued, his voice unwavering. "He has proven himself to be easily manipulated and has forgotten the most fundamental principle of our family's success, that our name is built on integrity, not just on assets. Therefore, I cannot, in good conscience, hand the future of Beaumont Enterprises into his hands." "This is outrageous," Santiago snapped, standing up. "Your Honor, my client's father was clearly not of sound mind. He was heavily medicated. He was certified as of sound mind by 2 independent doctors the day this will was signed, Mr. Santiago. Their sworn affidavits are attached," Judge Alberto said coolly, not even looking up. "Now sit down." Santiago sank back into his chair, his face pale. The judge's eyes found Felicity's across the room. She held his gaze, her heart hammering against her ribs. He continued, "Therefore, I hereby bequeath my total majority interest in Beaumont Enterprises, which represents 51% of the voting shares, not to my son, but to a trust. This trust shall be known as the Arthur Beaumont Legacy Trust." Vega, he had used her maiden name. A low, guttural sound escaped Isabella's throat. The judge continued, reading the clause that would change everything. "The sole beneficiary of this trust is my first grandchild, the child currently being carried by my daughter-in-law, Felicity Vega Beaumont." The courtroom erupted into a cacophony of frantic whispers. Thomas looked as if he had been struck by lightning. He stared at Felicity's belly, not with contempt, but with a horrified awe that was just beginning to manifest. That thing, that error, was now the majority shareholder of his entire inheritance. But Arthur Beaumont was not done. The killing blow was yet to come. Judge Alberto looked up from the document. His gaze swept over Thomas and Isabella before settling once more on Felicity. He read the final sentence of the article, his voice ringing with a deep, posthumous finality. "The sole executor and fiduciary of this trust, vested with absolute and unconditional authority over all voting rights, board appointments, and financial decisions for Beaumont Enterprises, until the beneficiary reaches the age of 25, shall be the child's mother and my trusted daughter-in-law, Felicity Vega Beaumont." For a long moment the world stopped. The frantic whispers died down. The rustling of papers ceased. The only sound in courtroom 4B was the frantic, trapped pounding of Felicity's heart. She stared at Judge Alberto, sure she had misheard, that grief and stress had finally made her hallucinate. Sole executor and fiduciary, absolute and unconditional authority. The words didn't fit. They were abstract, alien concepts that didn't belong to her. Felicity Vance, the librarian, the cast-aside wife, the humiliated mother-to-be. What would you have done in Felicity's place upon hearing this news? Would you feel relieved or overwhelmed by the weight of the responsibility? Meant below, the queen rises. Then the spell broke. A choked gasp escaped Isabella Beaumont's throat. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated fury. the cry of a queen who had just watched her castle crumble into dust. "No! This is a lie! A forgery!" she shrieked, standing abruptly. Her mask of aristocratic control was gone, replaced by a face of raw, trembling rage. That woman, that scheming little tramp, she manipulated him. She poisoned my husband against his own family. Mr. Santiago, his face the color of ash, tried to hold her back, whispering urgently, "Isabella, not here. Control yourself." But she was beyond control. She pointed a trembling, diamond-covered finger at Felicity. "You! This was your plan all along. You seduced a dying old man. You twisted his mind. If my Arthur Beaumont," Judge Alberto's voice cracked like a whip, "you are about to be found in contempt. One more outburst like that, and you will be removed by the bailiff." Isabella's mouth snapped shut, but her chest heaved, and her eyes, fixed on Felicity, promised retaliation. Thomas was strangely silent. He sat frozen, his body rigid, his eyes wide and vacant. He was staring at the polished table in front of him, but he wasn't seeing it. He was seeing his entire world, the one he had been promised from birth, vanish before his eyes. The kingdom he was meant to inherit, the power he was supposed to wield, had just been handed, lock, stock, and barrel, to the woman he had publicly repudiated, and to the unborn child he had called an error. Felicity's lawyer, Maria Fuentes, leaned in, her voice a low, firm murmur in Felicity's ear. "Felicity, did you hear that? Do you understand what this means?" Felicity could only shake her head slowly, her mind a whirlwind of shock. She looked from Thomas's shattered expression to Isabella's murderous glare. She felt a kick, a solid, hard thump from within, a reminder of the tiny, oblivious beneficiary at the center of this catastrophe. Judge Alberto, seemingly unbothered by the eruption, continued as if reading a grocery list. "The will goes on to state," he said, his voice cutting through the residual tension, "that Thomas Beaumont will be granted a salaried position as president of operations, reporting directly to the board of directors, a board that the new fiduciary," he paused, looking directly at Felicity, "has the exclusive authority to appoint or dismiss." The implication was brutally clear. Thomas was no longer the heir. He was an employee who could be fired by her. Furthermore, the judge added, the will stipulates that Thomas Beaumont and Isabella Beaumont are allowed to retain residence in the family home, but only with the express and ongoing permission of the fiduciary. The deed and title to the property will be transferred to the Arthur Beaumont Legacy Trust. They were tenants in their own home. Their right to live there was now entirely at Felicity's discretion. The finality was absolute. Arthur had not only disinherited his son, he had orchestrated a complete coup from beyond the grave. He had seen the cruelty, the weakness, the greed, and he had built a fortress to protect his grandchild and the woman he believed could safeguard his legacy. He hadn't just given Felicity a shield, he had given her a sword, an arsenal, an entire kingdom. The will, Judge Alberto concluded, shutting the leather folder with a soft thud, is accompanied by a signed and notarized letter from Arthur Beaumont detailing his reasons. It explains his concerns about his son's profligate spending, his susceptibility to his mother's corrosive influence, and his cruel and dishonorable treatment of his pregnant wife. The letter states, and I quote, "I have observed Felicity for 2 years. She possesses an integrity that my son lacks. She is intelligent, compassionate, and her loyalty is not to money, but to family. I give this power to her not to punish my son, but to protect my grandchild. I trust that she will do the right thing." The judge looked at Thomas. The letter also expresses the hope, Mr. Beaumont, that this drastic but necessary action will afford you the opportunity to rediscover the man you were meant to be, not the man your mother wants you to be." That last sentence was a dagger aimed at Isabella, and it hit its mark. She flinched as if struck. Judge Alberto took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. "All of these revelations," he declared, his voice returning to its official, dispassionate tone, "have fundamentally altered the financial landscape of this divorce. The prenuptial agreement is now entirely irrelevant, as the primary assets Mr. Beaumont believed were his to protect are in fact not. The €50,000 settlement offered to Mrs. Beaumont is, to put it mildly, unconscionable." He looked at Felicity, and for the first time she saw a flash of something almost like a smile in his tired eyes. Indeed, Mrs. Beaumont is now, for all intents and purposes, the most powerful financial entity in this room. He turned to the stunned lawyers. "I am dissolving these proceedings for today. I suggest you all go home, assimilate the contents of this will, and reschedule when you have a more realistic understanding of your client's respective situations, Mr. Santiago," he added with a wave of his hand. "You may want to advise your client that his wife's mistake now controls his salary, his home, and his future. A little humility might be in order." With one final bang of the gavel, he declared, "Court is adjourned." The judge stood and walked out of the room, leaving a whirlwind of stunned silence in his wake. Do you think Arthur's decision was fair to everyone, or do you think he was too harsh on his son and wife? Share your thoughts in the comments. The Queen returns home. For a moment, no one moved. Then, as if a switch had been flipped, chaos erupted. Reporters who had been hiding in the gallery rushed toward the doors. Santiago was frantically trying to talk to Thomas, who was still catatonic. Maria Fuentes was patting Felicity's shoulder, her face a mixture of shock and euphoria. Felicity stood up slowly, her legs unsteady. She felt dizzy, disconnected from her own body. Isabella was the first to move toward her, her face a terrifying mask of fury. She strode toward Felicity, her heels clicking like gunshots on the marble floor. "You won't get away with this," Isabella hissed, her voice low and venomous, close enough that Felicity could smell her cloying perfume. "I will fight this. I will prove you're an unfit mother. I will drag your name through so much mud you'll drown in it. That baby will never see a penny." Before Felicity could react, a figure stepped between them. It was Thomas. His face was pale, his eyes wild with a frantic, desperate energy. He looked from his mother to Felicity, then back again. "Mother, stop," he said, his voice raw. "Just stop." He then turned to Felicity. The contempt was gone, replaced by a raw, pleading panic. The man who 20 minutes ago had called her and her child an error now looked at her as if she were a lifeline. "Eli," he began, his voice cracking. He even reached out a hand, as if to touch her arm before letting it fall. "Eli, I didn't mean that. You have to believe me. I was angry. I was pressured." His eyes flickered to his mother. "We can fix this, you and I. We can. We can stop the divorce. We can raise the baby together. In our home." The sheer audacity was breathtaking. The whiplash of his transformation from tyrant to supplicant was so sudden it was nauseating. He wasn't apologizing for cruelty. He was trying to reverse a transaction that had gone horribly wrong for him. He didn't see a wife he had wounded. He saw the new CEO of his life. Felicity looked at his desperate, pleading face. She looked at Isabella, who was watching them with narrowed, calculating eyes, her mind already plotting new strategies. And she felt nothing. No love, no hate, not even anger. Just a deep, chilling emptiness where her love for him used to be. She looked at his outstretched, trembling hand. Then she looked him directly in the eye, her own gaze clear and steady for the first time all day. Without a word, she turned and walked away, leaving her husband and his mother standing in the ruins of their fallen kingdom. Her lawyer, Maria, hurried to her side, and together they walked out of the courthouse, not toward a miserable, uncertain future, but toward an empire Felicity had never asked for, but which she now, by the grace of one good man's final act, commanded. The days that followed the bombshell in the courtroom were a blur of surreal adjustments. Felicity did not return to the small rental apartment she had secured as a refuge from her marriage. Maria Fuentes had insisted it was not safe enough. "You are no longer just a private citizen, Felicity," she had told her, her tone urgent. "You are the head of a multi-billion-dollar corporation. There are protocols now." And so Felicity found herself in a gilded cage of another kind, a suite in the Four Seasons Hotel, paid for by the Arthur Beaumont Legacy Trust. With 24-hour security in the hallway, lawyers, fiduciaries, and financial advisors, men and women in sharp suits and even sharper minds. All the remnants of Arthur's loyal inner circle paraded through her living room. They presented her with thick binders of financial reports, organizational charts, and legal obligations. They used terms like fiduciary duty, hostile takeover defenses, and quarterly earnings projections. At first, it was overwhelmingly intimidating. She was Felicity Vance, who found comfort in the Dewey Decimal System, not the Dow Jones Index. But as they spoke, she listened. She asked questions, simple at first, then more complex. And she discovered something surprising. The logic of it all, the intricate web of cause and effect, was not so different from tracing historical events or archival records. It was just a story told in the language of numbers. More importantly, she felt herself driven by a powerful, clarifying force. The memory of Arthur's words, "I trust that she will do the right thing," and the visceral memory of Thomas's, "That thing she carries is an error." One was a sacred trust, the other a declaration of war. She would honor the first by prevailing in the second. Her phone rang incessantly. The calls were from Thomas. He left dozens of voicemails, each more desperate than the last. They were a pathetic symphony of panicked apologies and self-serving promises. "Eli, honey, please answer. I'm so sorry. I've been a fool. My mother, she gets in my head. But that's over now, I swear. I just saw the crib we ordered. Remember the one from that little shop on the coast? It's all about us, Eli. You, me, and our little boy. Or girl. That's all that matters. I told Santiago to fire his legal team. We don't need lawyers. We're family. Just come home. Please, just come home, and we can work all this out." She never answered. She never listened to a single message twice. It was the desperate plea of a man who had lost his wallet, not a husband who had broken his wife's heart. Isabella, for her part, had gone silent. But it was a tactical silence, not a surrender. Maria's legal team reported that Isabella had hired a new law firm, one known for being notoriously aggressive and specializing in contesting wills. They were investigating, looking for any doctors who would testify to Arthur's incompetence, any nurses who would claim Felicity had restricted access to him, any scrap of dirt they could find to paint her as a manipulative usurper. A week after the hearing, Felicity knew she couldn't stay in the hotel forever. She had to make a move. The trust owned the Beaumont mansion. It was her home now. More importantly, it was her child's home. Arthur had not intended for his grandchild to be raised in exile, so she made a decision. She called Maria. "I'm going home," she said, her voice firm. "Felicity, is that wise?" It's not about wisdom, Maria. It's about sending a clear message. The Queen doesn't hide. The return was as dramatic as she had planned. She didn't sneak in the back door. She arrived in a black luxury car, arranged by the trust, that pulled up the long gravel driveway to the mansion's imposing facade. As she stepped out of the car, the heavy front doors opened. Thomas was there, his face a mixture of hope and terror. He had clearly been waiting for her. He wore a casual sweater, an attempt to look soft and approachable. "Hey, Lee," he called, a relieved smile touching his lips. "You're home?" "Yes, I am," Felicity said, her tone cool and level. She walked past him into the cavernous, marble-floored entryway. The air was still and smelled of lemon and lilies, just as it always had. "I've had a moving company arrange to collect my old things from the guest wing. They'll deliver my new furniture for the baby's room this afternoon." Thomas's smile wavered. "Of course, whatever you want. I told Mrs. Alvarado to air out the master suite for you. For us." Felicity stopped and turned to face him. "Let's be very clear, Thomas. I'm not here for a reconciliation. I'm here because this is my house now. It belongs to the trust that I command. You and your mother live here at my discretion." The words hung in the air, cold and hard. The color drained from Thomas's face. "My legal team," she continued, her voice devoid of emotion, "will be drafting a lease agreement for you and Isabella. It will stipulate the terms of your continued residence. Additionally, I've called a board meeting for Beaumont Enterprises for Monday morning. As president of operations, your attendance will be required. You will be expected to present a full report on the company's current standing." She wasn't his wife anymore. She was his landlady and his boss. The reality crashed down on him, and his composure finally shattered. "Felicity, please," he pleaded, his voice breaking. "Don't do this. Don't be this way. This isn't you. You're not this cold." "You're right," she said, looking him directly in the eye. "The woman I was would have forgiven you. She would have believed your lies, and she would have let you hurt her again. But you and your mother killed that woman. You stood in a courtroom and killed her, so you will have to get used to the woman who is left." Just then, a sharp, authoritative voice rang out from the top of the grand staircase. "What is the meaning of this intrusion?" Isabella was there, wrapped in a silk robe, her face a mask of fury. Felicity didn't even grant her a full glance. "Hello, Isabella." Her voice rang out with an ease in the grand space. "I'm home. I trust your new lawyers have explained the situation. You are a guest here. Try not to forget it." She turned and began walking toward the east wing, where Arthur's private study was located. It had been her sanctuary with him, and now it would be her command center. "Now what?" "You will regret this," Isabella shrieked from the landing. "I will see you on the streets." Felicity stopped, her back to them. "No," she said without turning. "You'll see me in the boardroom Monday morning at 9. Don't be late." And with that, she walked away, leaving mother and son standing in the opulent entryway of a home that was no longer theirs, silenced by the quiet, unshakable authority of the woman they had tried and failed to destroy. The final triumph of Felicity's journey, from humiliation in the courtroom to the head of an empire, is a stunning saga of karmic justice. A husband's cruelty brought about his own downfall. But a father's final act of love provided the ultimate checkmate. She not only won her freedom, but inherited a fortune and proved that true power comes from character, not just a name. If you were moved by Felicity's incredible triumph, give this a like to show your support. Share this story of empowerment with a friend. And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss another video where justice is finally served.